All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Bitcoin and digital assets, specifically what might be in store for them in 2025. So our main source material this time around is a Decrypt article, but we'll also be looking at a Reddit discussion that it sparked.
I think what's really interesting here is that we're not just talking about like market trends or tech advancements. It's about how the U.S. government might completely change the way it looks at and interacts with Bitcoin.
Yeah. Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis, the Bitcoin senator, she seems to think that 2025 is going to be huge for Bitcoin, and she's pointing to a whole bunch of different reasons for this.
A lot of her optimism seems to be about the new administration and how they feel about cryptocurrency. She's even called them the most pro-digital asset administration ever.
Yeah, and you can't talk about the administration in crypto without mentioning David Sachs. Their pick for crypto czar, I guess for people who don't know, crypto czar is like the main person for all things crypto in the government.
Exactly. They're basically the president's advisor on crypto, shaping policy and regulations and all that.
Yeah.
And Sachs really knows what he's doing. He's got a ton of experience as a venture capitalist, so he understands tech and finance.
And don't forget Trump's campaign promises about making the U.S. the crypto capital, protecting mining, making regulations better so there's more innovation, creating a good environment for digital assets in general. Sachs will probably have a big part in making those promises happen.
It's fascinating to see how this is playing out at the federal level. Senator Lummis has been a huge supporter of Bitcoin. She's been pushing a bill called the Bitcoin Act. She thinks 2025 could be the year it finally passes.
This Bitcoin Act, this isn't just some small change to laws, it's really big. It wants to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which would be a network of super secure vaults where the U.S. government would store its Bitcoin.
Yeah, and it wouldn't just be a small amount of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
The act says they want to buy 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years, 5% of all Bitcoin there is.
Wow, that's a lot. But how are they going to pay for it? I mean, without increasing the national debt even more.
Well, Senator Lummis has a plan for that. She wants to use stuff the Federal Reserve already has, like bonds and gold, to buy the Bitcoin. It's a bold plan, but it shows how much she believes in Bitcoin.
Didn't she also say that this strategic Bitcoin reserve could actually help cut U.S. debt in half by 2045?
Yeah. At a Bitcoin conference a while back, she argued that if the U.S. had Bitcoin, which tends to go down in value relative to dollars over time, the government could maybe avoid some inflation and not need to borrow as much money. A lot of economists and politicians have been talking about her idea.
It's definitely interesting. But before we get into the Bitcoin Act too much, here's a fun fact. The U.S. government already has about $21 billion worth of Bitcoin.
Most of it from crime stuff. So it's interesting to think about what would happen to it. If the Bitcoin Act passes, would it become part of the strategic Bitcoin reserve? That would make the government's Bitcoin holdings a lot more transparent.
I guess most people don't realize how much Bitcoin the government already has.
Yeah, and it's not just the federal government. Individual states are starting to get involved too, and they're not all doing the same thing.
Yeah. Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Texas are all doing something with Bitcoin. They're each taking a different approach, which I think is really cool.
Like Ohio is thinking about letting their state treasury invest directly in Bitcoin. So some of the state's money could be put into Bitcoin. It could lead to big profits. But of course, it's risky.
And then there's Pennsylvania. They're thinking about putting some of their reserve funds into Bitcoin to protect themselves against inflation. It's definitely a more careful way to do it. But it shows that even really traditional institutions are starting to see Bitcoin as a real asset.
And Texas is trying something even more interesting. They want to create a Bitcoin reserve, but they want to fund it with donations. And they might even let people pay taxes and fees with Bitcoin.
Pay taxes with Bitcoin? That sounds crazy. But I guess it could make things easier, and it could bring tech people and businesses to Texas.
Yeah, but it also makes you wonder how people who don't really understand crypto would deal with it.
That's true.
So each state is trying something different. It'll be interesting to see which way works best and which one has the biggest effect on whether people use Bitcoin or not.
Speaking of different perspectives, let's talk about that Reddit discussion, about the Decrypt article we talked about at the beginning. Some people weren't so happy with Senator Lummis.
Yeah, a lot of them said she was pumping her bags, which means talking about Bitcoin to make the price go up because she owns Bitcoin herself and would benefit. It's a good point, though. It's always important to think critically about investments, especially Bitcoin, which can change value really quickly.
Yeah, you always have to be careful and do your own research. But it wasn't all negative on Reddit. A lot of people were actually really excited about the Bitcoin Act.
Yeah, they thought it was a good sign that the government is starting to take Bitcoin more seriously, and that this could lead to more people using it and maybe even more new crypto stuff being invented.
Some people even thought that Senator Lummis was being a little too careful. With her prediction that Bitcoin would take off in 2025, they think 2026 is more likely.
Yeah, they said that based on how Bitcoin has worked in the past and all the new technology coming out, they think the price will go up even more later on. It's an interesting debate. Bitcoin and crypto are so unpredictable. No one can say for sure what will happen. But one thing's for sure. Bitcoin is definitely getting people's attention. It's making people talk and really rethink how money and finance work and what the government should be doing about it all.
So why does all this matter for our listeners? Why should they care about Bitcoin in 2025?
Well, whether you've been into crypto for a long time or you're just starting to learn about it, 2025 could be a really important year for Bitcoin. It's like a bunch of things are happening at the same time. We might have a government that likes crypto, a crypto czar, a big new law, and more interest from individual states.
Yeah, it's like everything's coming together. And we've already seen how the government can affect the crypto market.
Exactly. Imagine what would happen if the U.S. really did create a strategic Bitcoin reserve and started buying 1 million Bitcoin. That's a huge amount. It would be a sign to the rest of the world that Bitcoin is really important. Maybe other countries would start buying it too.
Like a race to get as much Bitcoin as possible.
Yeah. And then what happens? What if Bitcoin becomes a big part of every country's financial reserves? How would that change things? It's something to think about.
Yeah, it really makes you think. And that kind of leads us to our final question for you guys. What if Senator Lummis is right and the U.S. government really does get 1 million Bitcoin? How would that change the world of finance?
That's the big question, isn't it? We've been talking about the government maybe changing its mind about crypto and the new crypto czar and what's happening in different states. But the U.S. getting that much Bitcoin, that would be a whole other level. It could really change everything.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine what could happen. I mean, it could be really good for Bitcoin. It would show everyone that it's a serious asset that governments and big institutions should pay attention to.
Right. It could make a lot more people want to buy Bitcoin. And that could make the price go way up, which could then affect the whole economy. And other countries might see that and decide to buy Bitcoin too.
So it could become like a global race to get Bitcoin.
Exactly. And that could make Bitcoin even more important as a reserve asset.
But there could be bad stuff too, right? Like what if the U.S. tries to control Bitcoin? Because it owns so much of it. Wouldn't that go against the whole idea of Bitcoin being decentralized?
That's definitely a worry. And then there's market manipulation. If the government has a lot of Bitcoin, couldn't it use that to change the price, to help itself, or just to make things unstable? There's a lot to think about here.
For sure. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. Senator Lummis's ideas, the Bitcoin Act, states doing their own thing with Bitcoin, all the arguments happening online.
Yeah, and the main question is, what's going to happen with Bitcoin? Will it be a good thing? Will it help people? Or will it just become another way for people in power to control things?
That's the question we all have to think about. So we hope you enjoyed this deep dive and that it made you want to learn more about this stuff.
Yeah, remember, we're still figuring out what Bitcoin's going to be. And the decisions we make now will affect the future of finance. So be curious, stay informed, and keep asking questions. That's what it's all about.